returning from the war, it was quite a letdown because I actually enjoyed combat flying. Thrilling. Felt like I was accomplishing something. So it was a terrific letdown to hit the West Coast. The only thing that was up was I was going to meet Pauline and the baby. So I think I mentioned getting on the train in San Francisco and Frisco, getting off at Los Angeles, going to the preacher's house to pick up my uniforms, and there I was told that my brother Tony was killed and my mother had died. That was pretty hard to take. I had a spiritual struggle that night. Anyway, I get back to Spring Harbor. I have a month leave, and we did try to decide what to do. During that month, I contacted the old company because by law then they had to give me a job when I got back from the war. So they had a place for me, Weltronic Company on 8 Mile Road. And my job there was testing, by then testing the equipment as it came off the production line. By that time the company had grown and everything was done on a production line instead of individuals doing a job and following it all the way through. We had women doing the wiring. That was one of the main problems, the women. They made mistakes. So about 2 or 3 of us did the testing of each device when it came off the production line. But at that time they were getting pretty complicated. The same sort of timer I talked about before for welding now had eight vacuum tubes on it. It was a lot more sophisticated and a lot more accurate. So it took a lot of know-how to find out what mistakes the women had made and get them corrected and get the machine running. And I was so good at it, and I hadn't been back more than a couple of months when they put me into engineering department. And there I was actually developing new ideas. I can see if I can remember some of them. In those days, the idea for electronic equipment was to make it as simple as possible because the components were so big and priced accordingly. Complication was not acceptable. It had to be simple and as few parts as possible. And they still wanted it to be as functioning completely electronically. So I had to design a piece of control equipment that had no switches, no mechanical switches, no relays, if you know what a relay is, no relays. And I did it. It was fully electronic, but it took 2 more tubes to do it. But it was successful. It worked. One went into one of the plants, but it was rejected because too complicated, too many parts. Some of the other items I worked on was a furnace controller, hoping to sell it to Honeywell, home heating. Right now, when the thermostat says heat, the furnace comes on full blast. But there's a period of time when all you get out of it is cold air. So we put thermostatic switches in the bonnet so that the fan did not start until the temperature was up in the bonnet of the furnace, the heater.
Our heater does that.
Yeah, now it's been incorporated. But what they wanted was, as it heats up, they want the motor to go faster. When it's cold, they want it to go slower. So I put a speed controller on the motor. I had to make it into a DC motor and put a speed controller on it that reacted to the temperature pickup. And that worked fine because it modulated the heat in the house a whole lot better. But again, it was rejected because you had to have a DC motor, which costs more, and the controller, electronic controller for the motor, which costs more. That was one of the troubles of engineering all my life, was cost. Another thing we worked on was the very first microwave that I know of was developed for drying glue and veneering furniture. You dry the glue, you had like a big flat iron, when it had two sides to it, and they were part of the conductor of the high frequency heat, or the high frequency waves would produce heat in non-conductive material, like putting your pie in the microwave now. That was used to weld, to
Dry that glue.
dry the glue furniture. And we sold quite a few of those. And then another project I had was for small factories that had big machines in them. So they didn't have a big heavy power system, but they still wanted to run the machines. So I designed a device that would selectively allow maybe two machines to work at once, and it would cut out or block the operation of the other machines, whether it was a press or a welder or whatever it might be. So it was a first come, first served circuitry that wouldn't let only two of them online at once. Yeah, that worked out well. I don't know how many they sold. But then I was the chief development engineer of my company, and I had about 8 guys working under me as engineers. 4 of them were graduate engineers. Another project was the problem of adjusting welders, especially spot welders, so that they could weld different thicknesses of material in one pass. You come where there's two sheets of metal being welded together, or there's a bracket there and you have to weld a bracket 2 with the 2 sheets, or sometimes even 4 sheets where there's a joint or something. Well, I designed a circuit that actually sensed the voltage at the electrodes, the welding electrodes, fed it back to an amplifier, and controlled the amount of current being fed to the weld at the time. Of course, the controlling was done in the primary of the welding circuit, because welding voltage was low and high current, very high current, and a low voltage, like the voltage would be 1 or 2 or 3 volts of welding metal together. This worked out well, except that the production people didn't want the problem of keeping the wires on the feedback wires in the electrodes put together right, because the electrodes are cooled by water. You run a wire in through the water passage into the electrode, and that picked up the voltage. Another one was for the use of seam welders. A roll seam is where the electrode is not points that come together, it's wheels that come together and roll. And that's that making welding the halves of a gas tank together, the flanges around it.
It's a continuous rolling weld, huh?
Continuous rolling weld. So you had to control the voltage on that, and using primary control of the transformer. All this worked very, very good. Someplace I've got samples, photographs of the welds that are made with this automatic equipment.
Is that where the name of the company came from? Was
Weldtronic, yeah.
Welding
Weldtronic,
electronics. Yeah, that makes sense. So what was it like to come back to your family at that time and experience
Coming
post-war
back to my
America?
family, it was, I remember my disgust at the celebrations of people as the war was over when they hadn't seen any combat or anything. What are they cheering about? I remember that. And some fellows had a hard time making that adjustment, but I didn't because I had a beautiful wife and a real cute baby. And that made a lot of difference. But to get back to work, I ran into a few things that were annoying. I remember on the first time home from overseas, and I was home in Spring Harbor, I had to go to town to get something. And on Michigan Avenue, which is 2 lanes each direction at the time, I was in the right lane, and suddenly a woman beside me decided to make a right turn right in front of me. So I ran into her, and she was mad, and she accused me of being a slacker. How come you're not fighting the war? Of course, the war was over. She didn't know the difference. So she was a pain. Of course, Pauline mentioned the ration tickets. I didn't have any idea how much a ticket was worth in the way of sugar or meat or whatever. And she sent me to the store to get some meat. So I liked ham, so I bought a cured ham, which used up all the ration tickets for a month. And
You had a lot of ham, though.
yeah, I had lots of ham. There was some animosity or contention between the guys that didn't go to war and the guys that did. How come? I remember one thing that got me down very much was you could get a good house, a brick house, before the war for $5,000. Upstairs, downstairs. When I came back from the war, the price of the houses, they had more than doubled it. In fact, we had to pay for a new house in Detroit, we had to pay $11,300 for a frame house, wood siding.
Not brick.
It was a nice house. Corinne doesn't remember the house because she wasn't around. But it was awful nice. It had solid oak floors throughout. And it had a breezeway in the garage. It had a big
The house in Detroit?
Yeah.
I remember that house.
You remember it?
Yeah.
Oh. That's right. That's where you were born. We lived there when you were born. Mm-hmm. And so I really had very little trouble coming back.
Interesting.
Some guys did.
What about with the new baby?
The new baby? When I was overseas waiting that baby, I wondered, is Pauline going to pay more attention to that baby than to me? Well, the reverse was almost true. she was so cute, so pretty, that I paid an awful lot of attention to that baby.
Instead of Pauline.
Yeah.
Oops.
I don't know. Having the Lord did a lot to moderate my life. Knowing Jesus did an awful lot to moderate my life, so I didn't get into excesses of emotional stuff like a lot of guys did. I saw more combat than most men did, yet I didn't have any bad results from it.
No post-traumatic stress disorder?
None of that. And I was never bothered with stress. I thought stress was because you needed to get the job done. That's the stress. You're lazy and you got to do the job, and there's the stress right there. Getting back into the work routine, it was interesting enough. Some jobs weren't interesting. My work was interesting enough, so no problem with that either. I got good pay, but the Depression of 1949 came along. And we had problems then, but Kay was born, going away to World War II, and Sandra was born, coming back from World War II, and what was I going to say?
So what year was Kay born in?
Oh, I was going to say the conditions under which Sandra was born. I went back to my job in Detroit, testing, like I told you before. And then we rented a house fairly near the church and only about a mile and a half from work, from a older couple who were teachers, retired. But the teacher took a teaching job for 9 months period upstate someplace, Flint, I think. And we lived in this house. And they thought this house was just beautiful. It had a fireplace. It had the monster furnace in the basement with all the big pipes going to the different rooms. It was the gravity type. Probably never heard of a gravity feed heating a house, do you? Well, you had grills in the floor. There was a cold air return. And then the joists were boxed in, so over the furnace, and then a pipe went down to the bottom of the furnace. And that was the cold air return. And it was coal-fired by shovel. So I had to learn to take care of a furnace like that. And it was cold that winter. And poor Sandy, she cried all the time. I used to have to sleep with Sandy on my stomach, so her stomach would be warm and she wouldn't cry. Some of the times we would put her in the upstairs bedroom and let her cry, but that wasn't nice. And we had quite the experiences in that house in Detroit. We went to the Free Methodist Church called the Third Church, or Redford Church. And there was problems with some of the younger folks in the church. And one of the fellows that was a problem was the son of a preacher. The guy had been a preacher in that church, but he was somewhere else, and the son abused his wife, and she divorced him, and he latched onto another woman, and that's the reverse of that. She divorced him, and she got tangled up with another man who was his worse, and beat her. And so we just knew about him, and I wasn't getting very good pay then. So when the guy came to the door and told us who he was, he said, "Can you give me a room upstairs for a while?" We said, "Sure, no problem." But by 8 o'clock that evening, the police were at the door to get him because he had broken his injunction to stay away from this other woman. He wasn't only supposed to be within a mile of her, and he was about 5 blocks from her. So there went our source of income. It's one of the things. But this house was so dusty and so dirty. The first thing I did, we bought a new Electrolux tank type sweeper, and we removed all the grills in the floor and sucked out all the dirt we could get.
This is why he likes canister vacuums to this day.
Yeah, and we had to clean the dust off of everything. We
Is that
didn't
because of the coal?
because of the coal. Uh-huh.
So black,
Yeah.
really fine black dust.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
There were upstairs bedrooms, none downstairs, but at the back of the house was a sunroom. Pretty nice. It was it was all windows. And it was room enough for a bed back there. So that's where Mother and I slept. And had a little crib for Corrine in the same room. Don't mean Corrine, I mean Sandy. And Kay, we used the dining, breakfast nook was the thing in houses then. It was just a little room you could barely get into with a table to have breakfast at, or right off the kitchen. So we took the table out and stored it in the basement and put Kay's crib in there. That Kay was a problem to keep covered up at night. And you just couldn't keep her covered up. So I tried several things to keep her covered up. I had take a nice soft bathrobe belt, you know what I mean, and I'd tie it around one of her ankles, and then tie it to the foot of the bed, so she couldn't crawl out from under the covers. By then, of course, she was how old? 46. She was a year and a half old. How far apart are they? Kay was born in March of 45, and Sandy was born in December of 46. Oh, I remember our pay wasn't very good, enough to live on and pay our rent. And the car then was getting kind of old. Cars aged quite rapidly then. It's a 42, and this was 1947. 46 and 47. And I did things then, mechanically, I don't know how I did it. The 42 cars had the brand new vacuum-assisted shifting with the shift lever, short lever on the steering column, lever about so long. And you just flipped it from one place to another.
3 on the tree, huh?
Yeah. Only it was just a short little lever because it was vacuum assisted. A piston under the transmission.
But it was still a manual transmission?
It's still a manual transmission. And it got so it wouldn't work. So I crawled under that car in cold weather, took that thing out, took it all apart and cleaned it up and lubricated it and put it back in. And it worked okay. But we, in the summer of 47, we went shopping for a house. In fact, probably before that, because we knew we had to get out in June. So we went shopping for houses, and we saw these houses on Evergreen Road. And they were built on 2.5 city lots. City lots, standard lot was 40 feet wide, these houses were built on 2.5 city lots.
So 100 feet wide.
Uh-huh. And it had a garage beside the house, connected with the breezeway. The way the garages were in the older houses, they were behind the house, and you got into them through the alley. You know what I mean, what an alley is. It used to be an alley was a drive between the backs of all the houses that it connected to the street. So this house, the Scammahorn house, the garage was sort of behind the house, but you still drove in from the front. So we went shopping, and we over on Evergreen. We were 3 blocks over east. No, 3 blocks west of Evergreen was Lasher, not Lasher, but what was the name of the street? Doesn't make any difference. My mind's slipping. Were these houses, a row of 7 houses, all essentially alike. Just they're somewhat different on the exterior. So, but then work had picked up a little bit, and I was getting some overtime. So I was able to get a loan on the house. The house cost $11,200. It was a big bedroom upstairs.
It was a brand new house?
Brand new house,
Wow.
never been lived in. And
Why did the prices go up so much from before the war?
I don't know. It was just the economy was boosted by the war. Everybody started getting all these big wages, so then they started the inflation.
Okay.
The people that worked in the plants to build airplanes and boats and so on. But we loved that house. I enclosed the breezeway so that we had a little more. There wasn't so many breezes in the breezeway anymore. And the garage was nice. I was able to put a upper floor in the garage that I used to store stuff in. Is sort of a little workshop over the garage. When we bought the house, the yard wasn't done. And so that spring, that fall, we had to work on the yard. I think we got grass planted growing before the bad weather came. One thing I had to do to the house was the radios wouldn't work in it. There's static on the radios. And I decided the problem was the wiring in the house. So I went throughout the house, and every box, switch box and junction box, took the joints apart and redid them and soldered them.
Instead of using the little wire nuts they use?
Yeah, instead of using the wire nuts or whatever it was they used.
Electrical tape?
I think they used a soft rubber tape. That did away with the static in the house.
Okay.
The house, the furnace in that house was a modern furnace of all things. It was in a streamlined jacket, and there's a coal bin over in the corner. And I didn't want to buy a automatic coal stoker, which was quite expensive, and people had a lot of trouble with them. It had a little motor in the coal bin and a hopper. You put coal in it, and then it went into the screw, and that screw fed the coal into the bottom of the furnace. That was a pain. So I lived with that a while, but I put extra controls on the furnace. I put a little blower on the ash pit door, and I tied it with micro switch, so that when the damper motor called for heat, then that little blower would start. That door would open and the blower would start. And that made that furnace work a lot better because it could die down quite a bit. And when the thermostat called for heat, there was enough coals there that it would start burning again. It wouldn't do it by itself, but with a blower on it, it would.
Yeah. So.
In about 2 or 3 years, we converted it to gas.
Yeah.
The water heater operated in those days from a coil, loops of coils in the furnace. So you had no control over that water heater heat. So if you had a very, very cold day, the water in that tank got awful hot and it was popping and banging, and it was a hazard, I thought. So what did I do for that? I put in a new water heater myself. And then we wanted to finish the basement in the house because it was just a bare cement basement. It was a deep basement. It had drains in the floor. And that part of Detroit had very good sewers, so storm sewer, the basement drained into the storm sewer. And so we put, I put asphalt tile all over the basement floor. And with a blowtorch, I heated it so it formed nicely around all the drains and all the posts and everything. Did a beautiful job. And then I went throughout the basement, and the piping and the furnace ducts were hanging down from the basement ceiling, and that meant you'd bump your head on them. So I shortened the ducts, the risers, and I moved all the ducts up against the joists so that I had more headroom. And then the pipes, I rented a pipe threader, and I pulled out all the plumbing and ran it between the joists and even drilled holes and ran it through joists when I had to. Short pieces of pipes through the joists and then couplings to connect them all up. So then I had a nice high ceiling. Then I put Sawtex on the ceiling. I did the walls. The walls were done with furring strips nailed with cement nails to the cement block walls. And then we used what was called surf wood. You don't see it anymore. It's a 5/16 inch plywood, but they'd run a wire brush with the grain over it, so it had a real coarse texture to it, showing the grain of the wood. Then above that, I had green Solatex planking. So it was real pretty. Do you remember it? Remember the
Don't remember
basement?
the basement.
And I even installed a shuffleboard pattern in the tiling on the floor in this basement. So it was quite a nice house by the time, in a few years. But then we had more kids. Let's see, where'd everybody sleep? The downstairs was 2 bedrooms. The bigger one, Mother and I slept in. The smaller one, the 2 little girls slept in, Corinne and Wendy. And upstairs, there was a big hall upstairs, and Ricky slept upstairs on a narrow cot. And Kay and Sanders slept in the big bedroom upstairs. That's how we slept. We had 1 bathroom, and it just happened that I had to get up sooner before the kids did, so we were able to get along fine. We had to like each other, that's for sure. So we loved that house, paid for it quite quickly, started saving money, and
When did Pauline go back to work at that point?
We decided to build a house in Spring Harbor so the girls could go to school in Spring Harbor for high school and college. So Pauline got a job back. No. Yeah, she had a temporary job back in Garden City. So she drove, and I rode the streetcar and bus to work all the way across the center of Detroit. And by that time, Waltronic had laid me off, but they got me a job at Chrysler Corporation Dodge Division, and I was rated a journeyman electrician because of my previous experience. The union accepted that. So I maintained and repaired the very equipment that I had designed at Waltronic, and I improved it a lot. In fact, I did a lot of improvement on all their electronic equipment. By that time, there was quite a bit getting into the factories, like induction generators for heat treating, both for annealing and for hardening. So I worked on that, and then I was made a assistant foreman. Then I was the boss of all the electricians throughout the plant. It was a big, big plant. In fact, the whole car was made there. The only thing I think that was shipped in was rear axle housings. I saw them coming in on freight cars. But we built our own engines right there. Starting from scratch, we built our own Dodge engines. And they had engine test stands. Chrysler Dodge, I don't know if the other divisions did it, but they ordered test stands for the engines. So each engine, every engine that was built, got hooked up and ran on the test stand to check its performance. So to put a load on the engine, they tied it to the power line with circuit breakers. So the engine that ran a certain speed and get right in step with the three-phase 60-cycle power, and they were pumping power back into the lines with the engine test stands.
So you were using it as a generator, huh?
Using it as a generator.
Yeah.
But some of the equipment didn't work too well. I got that going. Some of the circuitry that read the performance of the engines didn't work too well. So I did a lot of improvement, even on the equipment I designed. So when I came to be selected as a foreman, they heard that I wouldn't work Sundays, because when I was just an electrician, they'd call for overtime, and I'd turn down the overtime because it was Sunday. So before they confirmed me, I had to go talk to the chief engineer of the whole plant, big wheel up front, big office. And he asked me some questions, and what about this working Sunday thing? He says, no, you don't like to work Sundays, but you know, if you don't work Sunday on maintenance, then nobody works on Monday when the equipment breaks down. So he talked me into working Sunday without complaint. So my pay more than doubled when I became a foreman. But I was on the second shift as a foreman. And here I was bossing men 15 years older than I, which was somewhat of a problem because they thought I shouldn't be a foreman at first place because I was so new with the company. But I was so capable. If there was a severe problem, and the maintenance electricians couldn't solve it, then I would solve it for them. In those days, we were split up in different categories. There was the maintenance electricians, there were the construction electricians, there were the ordinary pipe fitters, and there were the steam fitters, and then the mechanics, there were the millwrights that moved the heavy equipment when they had to, and handled the heavy equipment, put in new equipment, so on. So it was quite an operation. So I bought I was driving a Chevrolet then, 49 Chevrolet. That meant I couldn't park in the supervisor's parking lot.
Because you had a Chevy, not
Because I had a Chevy.
not a Chrysler.
So I turned it in and bought a new 1952 Dodge four-door sedan, nice big roomy car. Then I could park in the supervisor's parking lot.
You've liked Dodges ever since, huh?
Yeah. Well, I did go back to Chevrolets for a while. I owned a 61 Chevy and a 62 station wagon. And then I had Pontiacs. I had the 63 Pontiac Grand Prix, and I had the 65 Safari station wagon Pontiac.
What year was the Catalina?
Catalina was a 68.
68.
Yeah.
And that's the one Rick has now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that covers my work experience until the Korean War came along. Actually, when the Korean War started, the auto companies cut down on production and had some of them converted to weaponry, and that forced me back on first shift as an electrician. I didn't like it. It got dirty. It's funny part about working as a foreman at Chrysler, I had to wear a suit. So I had a black striped suit and I wore black striped shirts and a black cap, so the dirt wouldn't show. But I learned to crawl over greasy machines, troubleshooting to find out what was the matter and not get very dirty. When I get to work for Goodyear, supervisors wore old raggedy clothes. It was just a custom, I guess. So much difference between the two companies. So it was from Dodge that I was called to active duty in the Korean War. I don't know if I've talked about the Korean War or not. Well, I welcomed it because, of course, my pay would increase quite a bit as a captain. And but what to do with the family? So I was assigned to Glenview Naval Air Station as an instructor pilot. It's in Chicago. And there I retrained other pilots coming in for refresher courses. So I drove back and forth the 300 miles for a couple months, and I said, enough of this, I'm going to buy a trailer and we're going to live together. So I went shopping for a house trailer.
You had all 5 kids at that point?
No, we just had 3.
Oh, just 3.
Kay, Sandra, and Ricky. So I found a pretty nice one, L car. It was 30 feet long. And I had a car that would pull it in those days. Nowadays, you got to have a big monster pickup truck to pull the same size. People think you got to have this big monster pickup truck to pull the same size travel trailer. So, bought the trailer in Chicago, and I was reassigned to Cherry Point, North Carolina, Marine Corps Air Station there. So we rented the house to a young couple who paid the payment and the expenses of the house, the insurance and the payment and all that. They paid that for their rent. We took off for Cherry Point in the travel trailer, pulled with a 6-cylinder engine with a manual shift and a fluid drive. The big thing then was fluid drive clutch, a fluid drive clutch. I liked that car. You could drive without shifting if you wanted to. You had to start up slowly. Or you could pull up at a traffic light, put it in low gear and let out the gas and sit there. When you wanted to go, you just shoved on the gas. Away you went. I just for the fun of it, I drove it all the way from Chicago to Detroit one time without shifting at all. But it was a very comfortable car.
Okay.